Hello there, I'm showing up once again late at night. My 9 children are all in bed, and I'm showing up to read the first full chapter of Heirloom, The Faith and Wisdom of Anne Murphy, written by Kimberly Iverson. That's me. Chapter 1, Eyes That Are Good. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Matthew 6:22. Hers were good, really good. Every time I talked on the phone with her, she would share about the good in her life. Her good, healthy eyes had been trained, disciplined to see correctly into each and every situation. Never mind the fact that she had just lost her son to the same exact brain cancer that took her daughter 20 years prior. Never mind that her brother and old age companion passed away suddenly just weeks after losing her son, thus leaving a double void in her life. Never mind the fact that she was nearly 93 and still had a revolving door of a household with people constantly coming through to stay with her, pop in to visit her, or settle in to learn from one of her weekly Bible studies. She always spoke of God's faithfulness. "The Lord is just so good," she would say, and then proceed to name the tiny graces he had given, or glimpses into his word that he had bestowed, or a relationship that had come to enrich her life. She was choosing to give thanks that her life was so full. She could have easily complained about how many guests, both invited and uninvited, graced her doorstep. But because she knew the love of God and knew his love for his people, she welcomed each one. How does one learn to see, name, and receive fullness from all the good? How does one do it when much around you seems bad? I lift up my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. Psalm 123:1. It seems that her eyes were continually being lifted up, and it was in that upward gaze that she could see a good and faithful king on his throne. He was seated on it, established, so that all below was under his lordship and reign. For this very reason, all could be counted as good. The ability to see the good in every circumstance started at a young age for Grandma, but it was also tested at a young age. Her spiritual vision that could pierce through the cloudiest of situations to see the blessing in them was not just a natural inclination, but an exercise of the will. How can one learn to continually find the good even in the fiercest of life's storms? In 92 years of life, this woman, Anne Murphy, modeled how. Eyes that are good in childhood. Family relationships and childhood experiences are our first teachers, and often the first means by which we begin to be aware of God and hear him speak to us. Our interpretation of these things plays a role in the shaping of our adult lives. Anne Murphy, in her book, This I Know. Grandma's view of the world being so good was cultivated early in her childhood as she recounted all the blessings in her life and observed the wonder of God's creation. She relates a story in her book, This I Know, of such a view. The back bedroom was large and airy, with open windows on 2 sides. I was lying on the bed, on my stomach, with my elbows propping my chin in my hands, musing about all the things I liked in my 8-year-old life. Thinking no one could hear me, I began singing a little song of praise to God. "Father, I love you. You are so good to me. I thank you for all the nice things you give me." I paused to think of some specifics I'd like to mention, when to my utter surprise and horror, Papa, her father, stepped into the room smiling and said, "Why, what a sweet song. Thank you, honey." I was stricken. He thought I was singing about him. Too embarrassed to correct his mistake, I slid off the bed and took his hand. We walked together out of the room. This I know, page 7. And then again she reflects on how happy and pleasant things were as she gazed upon the beauty, stillness, and splendor of God's creation. I can't consciously remember my parents or adult relatives talking to me about God or how they felt about Him, but I remember waking up summer mornings on the sleeping porch and lying in bed, watching the daylight break through the leaves of the pecan tree that shaded the porch. I remember listening to the birds and thinking about how nice it was to be out of school for the summer. I remember feeling so free and happy that it seemed natural and sensible to thank God for all the things I loved. I had not yet read Psalm 66:3, but I was in agreement with it. Say to God, how awesome are your works. This I know, page 10. I can't help but think about every home that Grandma has had. There was a continual endeavor to plant new plants everywhere she lived, whether she had a large space or a tiny one. Maybe not with the greenest of thumbs did she cultivate all those plants. Quite a few actually died along the way. But she relished the ones that did survive. Quite possibly, this was a continual returning to the ways that God first captivated her eyes and attention to the fact that He is good. He has manifested His goodness in every plant, every bird song, every refreshing breeze, every ray of sunshine breaking through the leaves. Just as she cultivated the plants and flowers that spoke of His goodness, she also cultivated a view of the best all throughout her life. Eyes that are good, find the priceless and invest in it. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:19-21. I'd love for you to come see me again, honey. She had just finished catching me up to speed on what she had been doing the past couple of weeks. It was mid-June, and it sounded more like the schedule of a booming Anne's Bed and Breakfast than the schedule of an almost 93-year-old. The visitors were constant. Grandma, aren't you worn out? I want to get over there, but I don't want to overwhelm you with constant visitors. Her response, I'm fully aware that, being in my 90s, I am in the final chapter of my life, and so I welcome all the people I can see while I can see them. I want to enjoy them while I'm here. June 6, 2018. Her response and my assumption juxtaposed two different worldviews. My assumption reflected a view that people are a burden and add stress and chaos to your life, and possibly get in the way of what you actually want to be doing. Grandma's outlook was that people, especially family members, added a richness and depth to one's life, and there is no greater priority, besides spending time with the Lord, than knowing and treasuring those relationships which God had entrusted to us. Conversations we had had in the past reverberated from the memories. My family is one of the greatest treasures in this life. They are such a gift from God. You know, in Genesis, the very first thing God had established after He created the world was the institution of the family. If God made that a priority and the very first building block of humanity, then I think it would be a wise investment for us to do the same. I tune back into the conversation at hand. God is just too good for us to focus on what we don't have, so I want to see all the people I do have. I could sense a preaching to oneself or reiterating what the Lord had been impressing on her heart, probably in those long quiet times as she grieved the recent loss of her son and brother, to add to the many whom she had already said goodbye to. In the past 20 years, she had experienced a sort of wiping out of her generation and all those she held dear from years past. She could easily have allowed the grief and loss to consume her. We get to choose what we see and invest in. When the Israelites were in the desert, the ones that complained and doubted the goodness of God ended up dying in the dry and bleak wilderness. They made a rather unwise investment, I have observed. Grandma never lost her ability to interject her witty sarcasm into even the deepest of theological concepts. The ones that stayed alive were the ones that learned complete dependence upon the Lord for everything, trusting that He was doing good for them. Because of their dependence on Him, they were guided in how to move out of the desert and into the promised land. When they were constantly seeking the Lord and moving at His command, they were able to overcome and defeat overwhelming enemies along the way. Joshua 5, 6, 7, and 9, Numbers 14:2, and Numbers 32, 11 through 13. The conversation was then interrupted by some sort of child's urgent need and thus ended quickly. But this was not the only time that month that she asked for me to come see her. It was as if she knew that the end was drawing near. I did come see her, but it was after she suffered a major stroke. I came and saw her in the heat of early July and sat with her and sang to her and read scripture to her and prayed with her on her last few days on earth. She was no longer able to speak, but she had used her words wisely when she was able, so they were enough to fill a soul and renew a mind and refocus one's sight. Now it was my turn to affirm and encourage and speak life into her. ... Grandma went to be with Jesus this past week, July 11th, 2018. Hers was one of the human relationships I have treasured most deeply out of all the fleeting treasures of this life. The treasure trove of Grandma was enjoyed through talking and listening, just sitting and sipping coffee, and reflecting on and reading scripture. Two hearts were deeply intertwined because of a mutual love for the Lord and for each other. We had treasured each other deeply. I headed home after a week of continual tears and gut-wrenching loss as we watched Grandma deteriorate quickly after her stroke. It left an utter void as I departed from Grandma's haven home that had now turned empty. I returned to a home brimming with life, a husband to hold and walk alongside, 7 unique individuals growing, ever needing someone to listen to them, guide them, and support them as they navigated all of the pressing concerns of their ever-widening little worlds. As if that were not enough life, there was the teenage boy from our neighborhood living with us for the summer since his family got evicted. Then also the family of 5 that had moved in for 2 weeks to give them a break from forking out the exorbitant costs of a week-by-week roof over their heads that came in the form of an extended stay hotel. On top of that, there were the many neighborhood kids who know that there's always a party at the Iversons, so they come by to hang out too. I can almost hear Grandma's words and her hearty chuckle at the various adventures I often, but not this time, reported to her throughout the years of living and serving in the inner city. Well, honey, you indeed have a full life. At least you aren't bored. At least someone could laugh about it. I, on the other hand, could so easily get overwhelmed about it all and look right past the people that all this activity represents and just see the laundry scattered and ever accumulating, more mouths to be fed, more dishes to be cleaned up, more noise to endure, more bodies to be directed, and more to-do list items that just don't get done because new ones have emerged with the crowd. Or I could look upon it all with eyes that are good and choose to see it all differently. All of the activity could mean more relationships to be enjoyed, which is what Grandma so often saw. Along with the whirlwind and the ensuing disheveled house, there's more. More conversations to be had, more smiles to be shared, more hearts to be poured out, more prayers to be prayed, more creativity to be inspired, and more lives to be intertwined. It takes good eyes to see all this, and an eternally minded heart to invest in it all. Small sacrifices made with the joy and the strength of the Lord become an eternal investment which accumulate great wealth. It is an inheritance stored up in people over places and persons over their performance. Grandma had chosen the former, and because of that, she died one of the richest women on earth. A multitude of souls that she had invested in awaited her in heaven, and a multitude more mourned her leaving. She had truly stored up her treasures in heaven. One day, her deposits on both sides of glory will all be joined together in the presence of the Lord she served and the God of love she lived for. That's the conclusion of chapter 1.